I recommend drawing a bath with copious amounts of soap and holy water before watching this video, because you might feel a bit filthy after this one. We're in the blasted wastes of Khorne's domain, but the slow march of decay has already taken root. The Great Unclean Ones are on the prowl. The armies of Nurgle have come. These fetid, bloated hulks have all the weaknesses you'd expect from slow, massive hitbox monsters, quite similar to giants in that regard, which is not a unit you typically want to find yourself compared to. Bring them against Tzeentch, the Empire, or the High Elves, there's a good chance they'll be dead before you can sneeze. However, they have some unique tools that can cover for those downsides and certain matchups where they shine bright like a diamond. So let's see how the double Plague Lord build shakes out against Skarbrand and the Legions of Khorne. It's Greater Demon time on Warhammer 3, deep in the bowels of Mordor, atop the plateau of Gorgoroth, in the shadows of Barad-dûr. Figured it might be a good time to show off what Unclean Ones can do against a faction that can't just snipe them with artillery and focus fire them down with 10 million archers. The Exalted is leading my army, and he has a Mortis effect called Pestilent Decay, which will drain the health of any enemy in a 35-meter radius while he's in melee. You can imagine how that might be a useful trait against a melee-only army like Khorne. Passively lowers enemy leadership with Fetid Stench, has access to insane burst healing with Fleshy Abundance, a big wave clear spell with Blight Boil, and a chain hex called Blight Swarm that bounces from unit to unit, lowering melee defense by 20. He's joined by legions of Plague Bearers and his brother from another mother, a regular Great Unclean One, with some floppy jiggle physics and a can-do attitude to boot. Miasma of Pestilence and Stream of Corruption are his spells. Miasma in particular might be important for the coming fight with Skarbrand, just to make him a bit more wary of approaching for a duel. And the threat of Bloodthirsters is the biggest danger to Great Unclean Ones, so there's some interesting mind games where each player tries to figure out if the big boys are coming out to play or not. Rotflies and Furies are buzzing overhead for a bit of an aerial presence. Nurglings in the front ranks, 3 Plague Bearers and 2 Exalted Plague Bearers with their Death's Head biological grenades will round out the infantry contingent. And these guys are tanky. 49 melee defense with Cloud of Flies and as much HP as a mammoth. They are not an easy unit to bring down even if you outflank them. Across the beaten zone come the Exiled Ones, Bloodletters in the vanguard, and Skarbrand the Fallen, wielding slaughter and carnage. He can double his already massive weapon strength if he reaches his kill threshold, but by far, his most dangerous ability is called Rage Embodied. When important fast movers approach him, he sprints towards them, activates this hex, and forces them to rampage for the next 35 seconds, which is usually more than enough to put them in the dirt for good. Insanely powerful ability that'll make him the go-to pick in a lot of matchups, particularly, I think, against Slaanesh. Other than that, it's a bunch of Chaos Warriors, Lesser Demons, Chaos Warhounds, and a Blood Shrine, with the Totem of Endless Bloodletting for support, and Gore Feast for regenning in melee. So it's kind of like an Altar of Cain. You plop it in the middle of your melee rush, let it support your troops, buff them up, and it'll grind through quite a bit because it's essentially a chariot as well. Hidden on the left flank for now are the dreaded Blood Crushers, which are a huge threat to Nurgle infantry. Big time weapon strength, monstrous cavalry stats, and they're designed to butcher foot troops while being difficult to target down with spells or missile fire. And remember, Nurgle is lacking in bonus per large, so the way to deal with them is pin them in place, then let the armor-piercing Rotfly swoop in from the skies. In the middle of the army, a Cultist of Khorne with a Gate of Chaos for summoning yet more Bloodletters onto an enemy backfield, and that can be quite a potent ability, especially against a faction that doesn't have a lot of speed. Although there's a little bit of speed on the field right now. The maneuverability will come in the form of those 2 Rotflies and 2 Chaos Furies who will have unfettered access to the air above Skarbrand. So as the battle gets underway, advanced scouting with the aerial contingent, finding out the Chaos Warhounds and Monstrous Cav, as both armies gear up for the grind. A gigantic Stream of Corruption, one of the most devastating spells you will ever see in your life, dealing a whopping fraction of damage to those Bloodletters. Time for Khorne to pack it in, I think. There's no coming back from that one. It's over. GG. Nurglings backing up the hill, but the Chaos Warhounds are hot on their heels, and they are ready for blood, but they'll just be met with a bunch of nasty pus and mucus and whatever the hell's inside a Nurgling. So the Bloodthirster, Skarbrand the Exiled One, going after the Great Unclean One, and a Miasma of Pestilence, lowering his melee attack and charge bonus by 40%. So he'll nope the hell on out of there. Doesn't really have any desire to fight 2 Great Unclean Ones while his melee attack is debuffed. And meanwhile, Death's Heads being lobbed over the top and exploding in and amongst the ranks of the Khorne demons. Now, The death stats themselves have not been super impressive from my perspective on the whole DPS side. They do have a healthy dose of AP, but even when they land shots on armored targets, they don't seem to do a crazy amount, so I wouldn't mind seeing maybe a little bit more damage out of those bad boys. It's a really cool ability, but it doesn't seem to be quite as impactful as I would like it to be, but maybe that's just a little bit of bias because I think they're super cool. They're already out of ammo and dealt 274 damage value to Khorne Bloodletter, so meh, maybe a little bit underwhelming. What isn't underwhelming, though, is the Blood Shrine in the center buffing up all those Khorne warriors and doing crazy burnouts in the middle of everything, styling on those poor Nurglings and melting them to puddles. Skarbrand has chosen to take the duel against the dreaded double Unclean Ones. He's been hit by the Chain Hex Pestilential Swarm, but with some good cycle charging, he can do a number on even the Exalted version. You've already seen it, but Skarbrand is just a monster. He's a tier above for sure, but naturally lacks some of the healing and utility of those Great Unclean Ones. So what I would do in this situation is get some chops in, force out an early heal, and then go elsewhere and avoid them until late game. You're not going to kill 2 Great Unclean Ones just with dueling. You need to wait until everything else is dead, so rack up some kills with Slaughter and Carnage, then return for that final fight with like 1300 weapon strength, and you should be able to tackle them. Rotflies are charging into the rear, but we have a Gate of Chaos from that Cultist of Khorne, and Bloodletter streaming into your backfield is a problem for any faction, but especially for a race like Nurgle, who can't really get out of the way. Well, when you get rear charged, even your Exalted Plague Bearers will not fare well, because Bloodletters are bonus versus infantry, and it's gonna hurt. Their physical resistance won't help, their melee defense won't help if you're being attacked in the rear, and that was a really good use of that ability. Skarbrand still tanking it out in the center. He's gotten one of the Great Unclean Ones down to half HP, and the other one down to 2/3 health, but that is where Fleshy Abundance comes in, and this is why Skarbrand shouldn't spend too much more time dueling with them, because an overcast version will get them back up to full health. Healing for Nurgle is just bananas. It's one of the things that keeps them actually tanky and survivable in these melee grinds, and they can kind of just back out and reposition, think about where to go next. And if I'm a Great Unclean One here, I want to wade into some infantry and start slaughtering all those foot troops. So Khorne is looking really strong in the center. Skarbrand has decided to disengage. Blood Crushers attempting to push through the Exalted Plague Bearers, but they're fighting in a choke point and can't be outflanked there, which is an ideal situation for Nurgle. And meanwhile, the Exalted wants to start getting that Mortar Strain effect in on some infantry, so he'll wait in here, and both the Bloodletters and the Warriors of Chaos out on this flank are in big trouble. Rotflies descending from the heavens behind, a Blight Boil, a huge bubble of corruption exploding in the middle of everything, but nicely dodged. Didn't end up doing too much. It would have if it had caught that formation in their center, but they got out of the way in time, and now the Khorne left flank is beginning to crumble out. Skarbrand is on the hunt once more, realizes that the Exalted Great Unclean One is isolated. Even the Blood Shrine is coming after him. But meanwhile, we've got a GWO just diarrheaing over everything, and this is one of those elements that makes you wonder what the ESRB is even doing. Like, what in the world? Literally dropping fat, steamy deuces on Khorne and laughing about it. You gotta love him, but he's pretty gross. He is a nasty boy for sure. What kind of monster does something like that? Just cackles about pooping on people. That's messed up. It's much nicer to just carve armies apart with your gigantic rusted plague sword than it is to literally drop dumps on them. Insane. That's a crazy animation, man. Peggy 16, maybe not. Anyway, it'll probably happen multiple times throughout the course of this battle. That's what Great Unclean Ones do. But the Horn of Khorne has activated that's plus 24 melee attack to everything on the Khornate left flank, the Nurgle right. Great Unclean Ones are beginning to double up on top of that Blood Shrine, but Scarbrand has something to say about that. Slaughter and Carnage are reaping a terrible toll. Nurglings are going flying, and the Fallen Angel is filled with rage and rampage, just as you would expect. Fecundity, another heal, going the way of a bunch of Great Unclean Ones and the units surrounding them swarming at their feet. Plague drones overhead, or rather the Rotflies and the Chaos Furies, are now going after the Blood Crushers of Khorne, and that's a great engagement for them, but Skarbrand immediately recognizes the threat they pose, and he'll stomp his way over. Now, this is a sick play, and why I think Rage Embodied is a top-tier ability and will make Skarbrand so incredibly powerful in certain matchups, in many matchups, actually. The Rotflies thought they were home free. They thought they were in the clear. Get a charge in, then disengage. But Skarbrand says, no, 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 not in my house. Immediately, Rage Embodied popped. Everything rampages, gets stuck in melee for 35 full seconds. So the Furies melt immediately. The Rotflies will probably not be too far behind. And that's a big loss. That's mobility for rear charging, for cycle charging in the end game that Nurgle may not have when it comes down to the final stages of this battle. So very nicely played, and the Nurgle center has disintegrated under those flanking bloodletters and the summon from the Gate of Chaos. But the Exalted Great Unclean One and his homie are still alive, and they are looking healthy and virulent and plague-ridden as ever. Streams of corruption emanating from their Nurgle bells, smacking people with the chains, and the infantry for Khorne really has no hope of tearing them down. So what they must do is kill everything else and then save them for late game and hopefully not get pooped on too much. But that's a big ask. That's a tall order when you're going up against the Great Unclean Ones in Warhammer 3. Throw in some belly mouth vomit for good measure. There's some nasty boys, man, for sure. Now, the Rotflies managed to escape somehow, but they are not looking very healthy at this point. Maybe a heal could possibly go their way, but the fact that they survived is huge, because with a rear charge here, they'll be able to break these Khornate warriors and free up the Exalted Plague Bearers, who will still take an hour and a half to trundle their way over to the other side of the battlefield. But better late than never, as my mom used to say. And Plague Drones with the rear charge coming in. Yeah, Khornate warriors, they're not going to die quickly, but the leadership penalty should be more than enough to break them and free up that side. So if Nurgle can get some bodies, get a nice swarming mass over there, they've got a chance to surround Skarbrand and finish him off for good. And in fact, the Bloodletters and Khornate warriors have worked so well in tandem. That is exactly how you want to use that combo. Use those sword and board in the front ranks, and then Bloodletters to flank, and you'll rout pretty much any infantry in that kind of engagement. Skarbrand looking for the duel here. He opened up with a bellow of Endless Fury, spewing magma, and then charged into melee. But more heals go in the way of those Great Unclean Ones. Fleshy Abundance upgraded, Overcast, and both of them will be topped off. And now it's a race against time. You need to finish off one of these Great Unclean Ones before the Rotflies and the Exalted Plague Bears make their way into melee. Another Horn of Khorne for plus 24 melee attack. But both those Great Unclean Ones are looking real healthy, and more importantly, they are mortis draining everything that is surrounding them. That is a huge issue if you're Khorne here, because you're getting attacked in the rear. Fecundity is healing up everything that you're trying to kill, and that slow march of decay is draining the health of your entire army. And this is the exact kind of fight that Nurgle thrives in. When they fight in a blob, when they can heal all of their important single entities in that blob, and when they're getting that mortis drain effect in, well, armies will melt. And look at that damage output. Everything is disappearing. It's all crumbling out. The Cultist of Khorne is saying peace out. Now they're getting Death's Heads thrown their way, and it's just Skarbrand remaining. And as the winds of change are blowing, the Exiled One will seek out that final duel, but he is about to get sent back to the Void. And the Great Unclean Ones tanking through so much damage, and they will win a duel against one of the strongest demons in the entire setting, one of the strongest characters in the entire setting, and Fleshy Abundance was a huge part of that. Well, there were two important parts there. It was the Pestilent Decay for that mortis drain, and it was the healing, and they just could not deal with both Great Unclean Ones, who had a fantastic showing. 2,400 damage value on the default generic Great Unclean One, and 170 kills and 4,000 damage value on the Exalted Great Unclean One, who in some situations is a fantastic lord. Again, against a faction like Tzeentch, not a good idea to bring it. You'll just get focus fired down. The second you get into range, it'll be a serious problem if you lose 3,000 value worth of a lord immediately at the start. So don't recommend that against factions with mass missiles. Maybe we'll see if they'll be viable against like Kislev or Cathay, but definitely not against Tzeentch. not against High Elves, not against Empire, or a lot of these artillery-based factions. But against rush builds, they thrive, and I don't think there are many lords in the game that could have had quite that impact, being able to tank through all that damage, output that much himself, Mortis Drain, heal, all that. I mean, like, Faye kind of does similar things, but certainly not quite as tanky as that Exalted. Now, Skarbrand did amazing. 4,200 damage value himself. He is a duelist through and through. He's terrifying. But I think it would have been better to force out that first Fleshy Abundance and then go beat up on some Exalted Plague Bears, break them quickly, free up more of your army so that in that end game you can get the full surround off with Skarbrand in a more healthy position. And then with 1,300, 1,400 weapon strength from Slaughter and Carnage that you would get from killing all those other lesser demons, then you'd be able to take that final duel with support from your main force. So, well played to the Khorne side there. It was a really fun battle, but the Nurgle boys are the winners today, and I mean, it was kind of quintessential Nurgle playstyle. It was really fun to watch. One of my favorite games I've played so far on Warhammer 3 on the multiplayer side. So, hope you guys enjoyed it as well, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out.